Section 3.4 is dealing all about proving lines are parallel. So the last couple days we've spent some time dealing with the fact that we knew that there were some parallel lines and we were able to conclude some stuff. What kind of things were we able to conclude?
Let's see, we talked about corresponding angles being congruent. We talked about alternate interior angles and alternate exterior angles all being congruent. We talked about those consecutive interior angles were supplementary. So we could prove things about those angle pairs.
And it was all because, what did you know first?
That the lines were parallel.
Okay, so the fact that this one is all dealing with proving lines are parallel essentially means you're not going to be given parallel lines to begin with.
Okay.
Necessarily. You might be given some of that stuff, but most of the time you're going to be starting with something else. So basically how that should sound is it's kind of like flip-flop of what we did yesterday. So when you basically start with what we ended yesterday, it's kind of like writing the converse. Notice this first postulate we're going to learn, it even has that word converse. Okay, so corresponding angles, postulate, converse. I'm going to go ahead and give an acronym for it. Corresponding angles postulate by itself, which is CAP, and the word converse is attached to it as well. Now that's an important word with this postulate name because all of these are converses from yesterday.
Okay.
All right. So think about what that essentially means. The corresponding angles postulate, what did you start with knowing?
We started knowing that the lines were parallel.
And then you were able to conclude
that those corresponding angles were congruent.
So if I wrote the converse, what would that sound like?
So now I want to start with that the corresponding angles were congruent, then the lines will be parallel.
All right, so if you look at this postulate, we have some fill in the blanks to make this a little easier for us. If two lines are cut by a transversal, so you still have to have the essential picture, so that corresponding angles are congruent, then the lines are parallel. So I'm hoping you're all looking at this and like, okay, that does sound like the converse.
Right.
It's exactly what it is. So in this picture, hopefully you see some angles, angle 1 and 2, and what kind of angles are these?
Those are corresponding angles.
Now,
same location.
Same location. Now, what we know about this from this is that these are going to end up being congruent. I have to give you this to even consider using this postulate. So if I give you angle 1 is congruent to angle 2, these are your corresponding angles, and they're congruent, then what would we be able to conclude?
That line J is parallel to line K.
So again, the converse. Yesterday these were flip-flopped. All right, so again, we don't know they're parallel. We can't assume they are, but we know that they are parallel after knowing corresponding angles are congruent. So everything today is all dealing with converse of the last 2 days.
Okay. The next theorem that we have up here is the alternate interior angle theorem, converse. And when we talked about the alternate interior angle theorem, we used AIAT. So this is going to be AIAT converse. And it said that if, let's go back to just the alternate interior angle theorem. It said if we had lines that were parallel, then we knew that what about those alternate
interior angles ended up being congruent. So if I flip-flop
so we're doing the converse.
That would mean I would have to be given alternate interior angles are congruent, then you can say the lines are parallel.
Perfect, and that's exactly what it states. So looking at this picture, we've got some alternate interior angles marked here. So if I know that 3 and 4 are congruent,
then you could say line J is parallel to line K.
Exactly. So again, proving the lines parallel. Instead of proving angles congruent, I'm proving the lines to be parallel.
Now the next one, consecutive interior angles theorem, converse. So a little acronym for it. And then again, there's that word converse. If I took that off, Mrs. Hograby, would it change the meaning of this theorem?
Absolutely. And we have to be careful to use that word converse, because otherwise I'm proving angles, proving something about the angles given lines parallel. Here I don't know lines are parallel. That's what I'm trying to prove.
So anytime and the reason why we're thinking ahead is we're going to do some proofs today. And anytime you're trying to prove parallel lines, you're going to see that converse essentially. All right, so we know the last 2 days that if we had parallel lines, then the consecutive interior angles were...
This is the weird one. Those were supplementary. They weren't congruent.
Yeah. And so if I give you consecutive interior angles are supplementary, then the lines are
parallel.
Hopefully you see that common trend. All of these basically end the same way. because the last 2 days, they all started the same way.
Exactly.
So that's why. So angle 5 and angle 6 are your consecutive interior angles.
So if they're supplementary, then we know that that line J is parallel to line K.
Yep. Perfect.
And the last one, alternate exterior angle theorem, converse. And again, that acronym is AEAT, converse.
So I got this. If two lines are cut by a transversal, so that the alternate exterior angles are congruent, then the lines are parallel.
Exactly. And we know that this one, looking at those alternate exterior angles, yesterday we talked about how the angles were going to be congruent, knowing that the lines are parallel, so we're just doing the reverse. So again, if we know that angle 7 is congruent to angle 8, then we know that line J is parallel to line K.
And notice again how Ms. Hograby is labeling her picture. She labeled what was given to us, and that's what we've talked about. Always label with what you're given. As you progress through a proof, if you want to label the more stuff, like if line J and K being parallel helps you with the future stuff, then you would label it. But since that's where we were stopping, you don't really need to have it there always.